Good morning. Yeah. So what we're going to do is I'll give a brief overview of the economic survey. And remember, when in the very first session, I happened to differentiate economic survey and budget. So when it comes to budget, it's simply the financial statement that records all receipts and expenditure for the coming financial year. So it's the plan for the next year. But before submitting the plan for next year, it's mandatory the government has to submit the state of economy report of the current financial year. So that being the reason, though many people, whoever happens to prepare for UPSC especially, do have this basic perception that I need to work up this economic survey. It happens to be, and it's okay. People generally consider it as just like a religious practice. But to be frank with you, my friends, if you are someone who is regularly reading newspaper, believe in me, you don't find not a single fact, not a single line that is new in economics. When I say the state of economy report, whatever happens to take place in that economy. So how did the overall economy? So in general, if you just look at the economic survey, okay, I'll show you the basic list of topics. So even if you just open the previous economic survey, you find more or less the titles or the chapters with the same titles. The first chapter is the state economy. Okay, of course, the taglines might change. But the first chapter of any economic survey, just simply go back, okay, go to indiabudget.gov.in, the website, where you have all the economic surveys of previous year's budget documents, indiabudget.gov.in. And just go through it. You more or less find the similar titles for every economic survey. So the first chapter is a brief overview of the entire economic survey. So that being the reason, if you think that you are missing anything before the examination, one chapter worthy revising before the exam is first chapter. That's enough. That gives you the complete overview of the economic survey. And then the second chapter, you have the monetary and financial sector, external sector, inflation, medium-term outlook, investments, infrastructure, industry, service, agriculture. So you have these subtopics. So without wasting much of your time, let's go into let's start with first chapter. So here are the highlights of the economic survey of this year. So we're going to just go through the entire, all the highlights from every chapter. So it will give you the complete information. And I suppose you are aware of certain terminology because you're already preparing for the examination, most of you. And I guess your Indian economy has also been completed. But in case if you have any problem with any term, let me know. Okay. So now you know the fact, and I know the fact that we are in the era of globalization. Of course, in the previous class, I was pointing out right now the dunya is experiencing a rapid deglobalization. To look at Trump, he happens to explicitly mandate from 2nd of April, I'm also going to impose very high tariffs on India. Because India imposes more than 100% custom duty on a fully built-in automobiles. I mean, a car assembled in any country outside India, and if you want to buy it, we impose 100% custom tariffs. The reason is simple: we just want to boost our own domestic automobile industry. That's it. But we are just really saying make in India. Don't you really think we should safeguard our own markets, protect the interests of our own producers? That's the logic. So just to keep the foreign competitors out. When I say foreign competitors, we're not discouraging foreign automobile companies coming to India. We always simply say, here is a red carpet, you're welcome. But we don't want you to dump your products made somewhere outside India. And that explains the reason why Mr. Elon Musk, okay, personally has requested the government of India, why don't you reduce the tariffs? Because I have a very big factory built in China. And that factory is good enough to meet the global demand. Now, if you insist me to construct one more factory in India, so that would end up being redundant. But at the same time, I also want you to remember the fact most of the Western multinational companies or most of the big enterprises, as of now, are pursuing a policy what is called China One Plus strategy. China One Plus strategy. So when I say one plus, or sorry, it's not China One Plus, okay, that would be misleading. China Plus One strategy. That okay, आपको क्या याद आता है? let's okay, let me fact this plus one strategy. Can someone point out what's the meaning of the word China plus one strategy? Yes, China plus one strategy. Because you know the COVID has much bigger impact on China. And at the same time, even after COVID, the Chinese government has gone for zero COVID policy. So in order to ensure no COVID cases gets reported, they have to extend the confinement of people for a very longer span of time. And that severely hurt the overall Chinese economy. And many multinational companies are not with draconian policies of China. And though if you notice the Western European nations and the North American countries do advocate liberty, human rights, but at the same time you would be noticing the Chinese government when it comes to human rights. In the Western countries are not at least on par with countries like India and other Asian countries. Because you know the fact China is a communist state, one party state. Unlike India, people doesn't have the same kind of liberty there. So that being the reason, many multinational companies were now looking for an alternative. So along with continuing, because they don't want to completely rely on their production within China. So you see what I say, majority of the multinational companies are looking for a China one plus. So let's also come up with a backup. Because you never know when do these communist leaders in China happens to come up with such kind of policies that would hurt the producers from China. So ideally, you would be noticing the fact that when people look for China plus one strategy, so India has a potential to be that plus one. Am I right? Because we have enough resources, we have skilled pool of labor, we have already readily available market. But you would be surprised to know, my friends, most of this investment that are moving out of China are not coming to India. Rather, the one who is really mobilizing and taking the advantage of this China plus one strategy is not India. It is, can someone name the country? Also an East Asian neighbor, Vietnam. Okay. So the what do you think could be the reason? Simple. For an investor, what matters? Ease of doing business matters. So majority of these investors do pursue the ease of doing business in Vietnam is far better than that of India. So इसका मतलब है there are still certain structural changes India has to make to be the global manufacturing hub. In fact, just 2 days back, the Prime Minister in one of his speech happens to point out that India has now to focus on creation of more jobs. And you know, no doubt, India happens to be the country, the fastest growing economy in the last 10 years. But you know, it has been very often criticized for the fact that our growth rate is a jobless growth rate. Have you heard about it? Indian economy growth is considered a jobless growth. Because if you look at out of these three major sectors of economy, that is agriculture and LED sector, and then the industrial sector, then comes the service sector. Service sector roughly contributes around 53%, to be precise. Let's round it to, okay, make it 55. So it would be easy for you to remember. Whereas agriculture sector contribution to GDP is hardly 18%. But around 45% of Indian population either directly or indirectly depend on agriculture sector. So look at service sector, 53% is the contribution to GDP. But you remember I've been saying that the employment elasticity in service sector is pretty low. I mean, the amount of jobs it could create is less. That being the reason, it is generally considered India is experiencing jobless growth. That explains the reason why the government itself is insisting, let's create more jobs. Let's concentrate on those sectors that creates more employment opportunities. But at the same time, without looking at the state of global economy, we cannot end up formulating any plan for the domestic economy because as such, though there is rapid deglobalization taking place, but still the Indian economy is being heavily affected by what is happening outside India. Am I right? So yesterday, when Trump has made an announcement from 2nd of April, I'm going to impose very high tariffs. I'm also going to retaliate against India because he already has proposed a 20% hike in tariffs, 20% hike in tariffs on Chinese goods, and Chinese already retaliated. The same thing with the Justin Trudeau, Canadian Prime Minister. He also said the same thing. You're buying a lot of electricity from us, and he openly advocated the Canadians. Please don't visit USA, and we are gonna not no longer gonna supply electricity to you, and please don't buy American goods in Canadian markets. So it is in this context you should have a brief idea understanding of Indian economy. So look at the first and first most slide. So here in this case, study growth outlook across country groups. So if you look at, okay, I have given you 3 bar. Okay, so the 3 bar charts. So one is the overall world growth rates, and then the advanced economies. In this case, AE stand for advanced economies. And I hope you understand when I say advanced economies, does mean the developed countries with high income, the high income countries. And then EMDE stand for emerging market developing economies. So where do you put India out of these two? Advanced economy or emerging market developing economies? Obvious, it's a part of emerging market developing economies. So if you look at the overall, okay, the overall world growth rate was somewhere around 3.2 to 3.3. When it comes to advanced economies, that's roughly around 1.7%. But whereas the emerging market developing economies seems to be reporting 3 times more than the advanced economies. I mean, when I say growth, how would you define growth? Avantika, are you an advocate? Huh? Okay. So my question to you is, so why is it, or what do you think could be the reason that the advanced economies, I mean, compared to the advanced economies, the emerging market developing economies, it's not only India. The average growth rate of emerging market developing economies is around 3 times more than the developed economies. Can someone point out the reason behind it? Yes, yes, my friends. Anyone? Anyone in the class? Okay. So I think around okay 6 months back, our former RBI governor, Mr. Raghuram Rajan, has pointed out, though he has been criticized for his statement, but what he said is absolutely true. So what this man has said, the reason behind India's fastest growth compared to the rest of the world is India relatively being a poor economy. So it does mean we have not realized our potential yet. And though India is said to have a potential to grow by around, I mean, by more than 10%, but India has never reported a real growth rate of more than 10% in the entire, okay, in its entire economic history. So that being the reason, okay, so we could increase our production compared to the previous year at a greater extent. But if you look at the advanced economies, they're already saturated. And increasing output beyond a certain extent is a really a difficult challenge. And moreover, you should also keep in mind the dependence of these global economies on the rest of the world. So like I pointed, the Russia-Ukraine conflict had a very big impact. In fact, the impact is as bad as the impact of COVID because the entire supply chain got disrupted. And beyond that, you also know the fact the Israel-Hamas conflict. And later, you also be, I think you also be aware of the fact the Houthi rebel attacks in a Red Sea. That's the reason. In fact, if you notice, this particular sea route is one of the world's busiest sea route, but a good part of navigation is taking place circumventing the entire African continent, resulting in increase in around 5 to 10% in transportation. So that being the reason, the entire world economy, okay, if you look at it, is growing at a very slow pace. And when it comes to developed states, their growth rate almost for 1 decade has been somewhere okay, 1.7 to 1.8. So if you look at the average growth rate of India, last year India growth rate is 8.2%. Now it is expected this year to be around 6.5%. And the next year, as per the finance minister, it is expected somewhere around 6.3 to 6.8. So that's mean we are growing at almost double the world average. 4 times the advanced economies, and still okay better than the emerging market or peer group. So that's one thing I want you to do notice. And next, coming to the okay, so in fact, when you look at the world economy, first thing as of now, what's the state of the world economy? I have shown you. And here in this case, okay, the second picture happens to convey you global manufacturing and services PM trend, PMI. What does PMI stand for? PMI stand for Purchasing Manager Index. Purchasing Managers Index. So now you might be thinking, okay, why after? So if you look at this particular bar chart, it conveys, it gives you the information related to the current state of when it comes to Purchasing Manager Index. Have you heard about this index? Anyone in the class? Have you heard about this Purchasing Managers Index? And what basically the information it conveys? See, the Purchasing Manager Index. Okay, there are 3 different organizations as of now which compute this Purchasing Manager Index. But the largely used index is by the one which is published by Institute of Supply Chain Management. So basically, the Purchasing Manager Index helps in understanding the is there anyone at least the Purchasing Manager Index helps in understanding what is the perception of the private sector. I mean, is the private sector optimistic towards the future, or are they becoming pessimistic towards the future? I mean, what are their expectations for the coming financial years? Because if you are a businessman, don't you really think you plan to expand your firm, your enterprise? You plan to invest in extra penny, isn't it? I mean, increased production, decreased production would be based upon your anticipation or expectations for the next coming financial year. So, agar if you have a positive perception, yes, okay, the coming days are gonna be a good days, which could result in a good amount of demand. So, henceforth, you end up planning mobile. I mean, you end up mobilizing more resources to expand your business, to increase your output. So, you could procure more raw materials, maintain good amount of inventory to meet the demand. So the Purchasing Manager Index, basically the index. Remember, I said index basically is an indicator. Can someone give you an example? An indicator is something like an average. Let's say if I want to know how your batch is performing, I'm not worried about the individual performance of Avantika and so on. So I'm just looking. Okay, I'm worried about how the overall batch is performing. Let's say the economy or history. What do you think I would look at? Individual marks, average marks, average marks. Because I'm not concerned about the individuals, I'm concerned about your overall batch. So then what should I let? The average. So average, the mean is the indicator. Normally indicator happens to be weighted average. And I'm not going to discuss about it. Don't index matlab, my friends, indicator. Sensex, sensitivity index, Nifty ke 50. So they all indicate how the market is doing, how the price of the underlying stock is changing. Same holds good. This which helps in understanding the perception of private the next coming years. Okay, or the future is what we call Purchasing Manager Index. So the scale, typically the index value 0 to 100. So if the value is beyond 50, it does mean a good number of investors, a good number of private investors are having a positive perception towards the call. So that's the meaning of it. So if you look at, okay, if you just look at the blue line, it indicates global manufacturing PMI, but rate on the black line. So that gives you comp, and you will be noticing it, friends. Okay, since okay, I mean almost since Jan 23, it's above 50%. So though there are certain hiccups in the global economy, but still a good number of investors are hopeful and optimistic towards the future. But of course, if you look at when it comes to global manufacturing PMI, that is less than 50, okay, for a long period of time. Service Okay, more or less happens to be moved. So it has been, except the manufacturing sector, when it comes to the overall economy, people still have a perception. Service sector chale gaya acha. Got it? So that's what it is. And okay, let me just now, okay, let me show you when it comes to PMI within India. So during, okay, so if you notice April, June, August 21. So if you notice after 21 to now, so the, okay, so you have the PMI manufacturing, services, and composite. So you notice that, okay, somewhere after 21 August, could remember, okay, you notice that there's been a better perception of in India, and that itself explains that India is also, I mean, the investors within India also have a great positive perception towards the next coming financial. So that's the very basic essence of purchasing manager index. So basically, what do? This Institute of Supply Chain Management would send some questions to the various private investors from various sectors, asking them, what is your perception? Are you planning to increase your investments? Are you planning to hire more people? Are you planning to maintain more inventory? If they say, yes, we are planning to maintain more inventory, we are planning to hire more employees, we are planning to raise more working capital, that means they have a strong perception that ugly, I mean, aane wala din is going to be good days. That's basically the essence of PMI. So if you look at the first two charts, okay, the first two pictures, so this gives the current state and this gives you the perception. Am I clear better? Yes. And now coming to, so I think that gives you the, okay, now coming to India. So now let's look at the, okay, so look at the bar chart at the top. India's growth remains close to the decade average despite global uncertainties. And I hope you understand the meaning of the word global uncertainties. Isn't it? There have been many issues that I guess you are aware of it. In spite of it, our growth rate has remained. Decadal average has been the average of the last 10 years. So look at, ignore the first three bar charts, okay, bars, and look at GVA. So whatever I'm pointing out, GVA, gross value added, and GDP. So can someone point out the difference between gross value added and GDP? Yes, friends. Can someone point out what's the difference? So if you look at the rate of change in GVA is around 6.2%, and more or less is the rate of change in GDP. Right? So what do you think is the difference between gross value added and GDP? Yes, friends. What do you think is the difference between gross value added and GDP? So here is this case. Okay, if you notice the two bar charts. I mean, look at, just concentrate on only the green ones, not the lower. That's an average for around 9-10 years. If you look at the green one, green bars, GVA and GDP. So more or less they happen to have same height. So what do you think is the difference between GVA, the rate of change in GVA? What does it give you? The rate of change in GDP, what does it give you? And how is GDP related to GVA, or how GVA related to GDP? Come on, friends. Okay. So because if you don't interact with me, and there's no point of having, okay, I would have recorded this session and shared it with you. Yes. Or what's the formula? How do you compute GDP using GVA? Gross value added. GVA stands for gross value added. What do you mean by value addition? Yes, at least okay. In the previous class, people used to, okay, type the answers, but now I think, okay, so I don't know why. Let me see. Okay. I'm sorry. Okay. So let's just be, okay. The GDP basically, GDP is equal to gross value added. But before that, let me make it value addition. Simply does mean value addition simply does mean enhancement of value, enhancement of value of goods and services before they get before they get sold or delivered. Enhancement, any kind of contribution by any of the factors of production at any stage is what we call value addition. And what's the formula for computing GDP using GVA? GDP is equal to gross value added. So what do? We do compute gross value added in each and every sector of the economy. So we broadly categorize Indian economy to three sectors. One is agriculture and lead, and then second is industrial sector, the third is service sector. And I am assuming the fact industrial sector is further classified into four subsectors: mining and quarrying, manufacturing, construction, gas, water supply, electricity, and other utility services. These four together is what we call industrial sector India. And then we have service sector further classified into three subsectors, like transportation, okay, hospitality, and all these things. So in total, we have around 8 sectors. I mean, broadly 3, and they're classified into 8 subsectors. So what do we do? In each and every sector, we compute the value addition at each and every stage. And to the total value added, we add the product taxes on the products, final goods and services, minus product subsidies. So any subsidy that the product attracts. So GDP is equal to GVA at basic price plus product taxes minus product subsidies. This is the formula. So in simple terms, GDP basically refers to, or I guess you understand the difference between market price and factor cost. Market price is equal to factor cost plus any tax component on it minus subsidy. So factor cost matlab kya hai? The cost incurred by the producer on the factors of production. I mean, the money spent in the form of rent, wage, interest, and his profit component for every unit of output. So what cost to producer is the factor cost, including his compensation, that is profit. But what the consumer pays is what we call as a market price. In this case, if you look at GVA is basically the income earned by all factors of production, whoever is being part of the production process. But GDP gives you what actually is the price at which the output is being traded. So when it comes to GDP and GVA, what is the basic difference is, to GVA, we add the net indirect taxes to get the GDP. And the net indirect taxes would be the income of the government. Am I clear? So this is how we compute it. So now, okay, I guess you understand. So this first bar chart happens to show you overall performance of Indian economy, gross value added, and GDP. So in simple terms, my friends, GDP corresponds to the total worth of output, and GVA basically gives you the total income earned by the factors of production in India. That's it. Income, how much income earned and how much is the output produced. So one is the measure of income, the other is a measure of output. That's the simplest way of remembering it. Okay. And now the next comes to the next bar chart. I hope it's clear to you, right? This is what we've been discussing almost for the past 2 days. This is the share of these components of GDP. That is private final consumption expenditure, government final consumption expenditure, gross capital formation, net exports. If you just look at the share of these particular components, you notice the fact that remains stable. That's the one thing you should notice. And that some important fact you need to remember is a large a large percentage of contribution to GDP is by private final consumption expenditure. Next comes the total investment, and then the order. I want you to remember the order. PFC, next comes GFCF, gross fixed capital formation, and then comes the government final consumption expenditure, and then comes the net expense. Am I clear, beta? Yes. And then look at the external sector. So when it's external sector, basically, okay, you might have been taught a topic by name balance of payments. So if you look at annual financial statement, how did we define? The comprehensive statement of all possible receipts and expenditure of government of India for a financial year. If you look at the definition of balance of payments, it's very similar to it. So balance of payments is a systematic record of all possible economic transactions a nation makes with the rest of the world. So here in this case, we are not looking at the transactions of government of India alone. We are looking at, or we are recording the transactions of the entire nation India with the rest of the world. What are the various economic transactions we make with rest of the world? Trade. It could be trade in goods, trade in services. Remittances. Indians earning abroad would remit money. Foreigners earning in India would remit money back to them. Indians invest abroad. Foreigners invest in India. Indians lend money to people outside India. We borrow money from abroad. Isn't it? We get our income earned from abroad back from our investments. Similarly, foreign companies, whoever invest in India, would also take some part of their profits back. So it's not only trade is the only channel of interaction. There have been n different economic transactions in nation makes with rest. If you could recollect, that is what we classify into foreign, sorry, current account, capital account. I mean the recurring part, non-recurring part, something very similar to budget. Okay, revenue, capital. But here in this case, also BOP, we classify as a current account, capital account. So, and I think you might be already aware of the fact when it comes to trade in goods, does India has a trade surplus or trade deficit? Surplus or deficit? So if you say surplus, simply type positive. Okay, positive. Deficit does mean negative. Come, yes. Does India have a trade surplus or trade deficit? Is better? Avantika? I don't know. Okay, let me see. Why is that today everyone seems to be very cool, composed, calm, no reaction? Okay, so if you notice the trade balance, so look at the yellow one. Okay, since 22 first quarter. So in fact, you notice the fact the yellow part of the bar chart, it is below the origin. So what does it convey? That's been we've been experiencing consistently trade deficit. The import of merchandise, I mean goods, is more than the export of goods from India. Okay? Yes. That's okay. That's what I want you to notice. And then next comes the okay service. On top of it, you find service trade balance. But have you noticed when it comes to trade balance in services, we have a positive trade balance. That's mean our export of services more than import of services. We export more services. Okay, and then net private transfers. Net private transfer does mean the money coming from abroad. Let's take the case of remittance, a good example, and the money going out of India. And you know, India is a country that receives world's large amount of remittances. Last year, we received around $126 billion. So that's the basic reason. The net private transfers. I mean, the net private factor income. You could notice it's first. But whereas if you look at the current account, CAB stands for current account balance as a percent of GDP, it's still negative. All right. So what basically this gives you is, okay, in the current account or out of all transactions that correspond to current account, how much money coming in? Inflow, kitna hai? Foreign money. And how much money moving out? Got it? Let's suppose if the total amount of money coming from abroad to India. So when we interact with rest of the world, and I guess most of you might be aware of the fact, we don't use rupee. What's the most commonly used vehicle currency? Dollar. So imagine if the net inflow, no matter whether it's a current or capital account transaction, if the net inflow is positive, I mean the money coming to India is more than the money moving out of India, going out of India, then obviously that surplus is what we could report as our forex reserves. But in case if the net out, okay, net inflow is negative, does mean the outflow is more than inflow. It does mean we should end up draining our reserves accumulated. So more foreign money moving out. So if you look at in the last, okay, almost for the last 1 month, the stock markets are really experiencing a two bad days. There's literally, I would say, bloodbath. And you know the primary reason behind all these things is a good number of foreign institutional investors are dumping their investments, taking their money back. So that's the reason there's been much of sale taking less. The price of stocks are really crashing. not one sector, almost the overall economy or the almost the entire basket that constitutes the Nifty or the Sensex. You notice a good number of sectors, a good number of foreign institutional investors are dumping their stocks. Supply has been much more than demand. Issue is that the prices started crashing. So when good number of these people would also take a good amount of money, don't you really think they all okay? It also would result in a good outflow, a large scale outflow would also result in making rupee weak because the demand for foreign currency is increasing. Whereas we don't have enough supply, in such case, rupee tends to become weaker. So you tell me, what do you really think is the best way to retain these investments? It's simple to prove the fact or to convey the fact that investment in India would have a great potential to earn a decent returns, if not now, in the near future. So if Indian economy would have been really stable and would have been generated stable returns, then definitely we would be able to retain in spite of any whatever the global phenomena that takes place. But generally, when it comes to short-term investors, traders, they always like to maximize returns in a very short span of time. So you see what I just said, there will always be some volatility in market. But yesterday you might be noticing the fact market has stabilized. And over a period of time, the market again ends up being a stable. Okay. So now this is basically the current account balance. And now coming to the next part, monetary and financial sector developments. Let me also discuss this along with the inflation part. So I'll just combine both of it so that you will have a better understanding. So if you look at my friends, somewhere from 22nd April to 24th December, look at I have on the picture you have three different types of inflation. One is CPI inflation, that is the headline inflation. And next comes the core inflation, that is deducting the volatile sectors like the food and fuel. And then the wholesale price index based inflation on the right hand side. That's a blue line. Okay. So for now, let's not discuss about much about wholesale price index. Let's look at CPI and core inflation. If you look at the core inflation, at least from August 23, is coming down. The core inflation, if you look at the black line, since August 23, is slowly started coming down. But whereas if you look at the overall CPI inflation, it seems to be still high. And there's a huge gap between the core inflation and the overall CPI based, the headline inflation. And can someone guess what could be the primary reason behind it? Because it comes to the core inflation, it's far below the 6%. So just look at, my friends, don't look at the right hand side because the right hand side number corresponds to wholesale price index based inflation. But the left hand side number corresponds to the CPI based inflation. So if you look at since August 23, the core inflation, is much below 6%. But you could notice the overall inflation is almost on an average 6%. So what is the reason behind such a huge difference between the core inflation, CPI based inflation, headline inflation? Any answer? Yes, friends. Okay, do you guys have any answer for it? The logic is very simple. Okay, and I think when it comes to food, especially food, the weightage of food. Because remember, I said the index number basically is a weighted average. Because when it comes to inflation, why do people generally are concerned about inflation? Why do we keep on looking at or tracking the inflation rates? Because to plan our investments, to plan our spendings. Because inflation helps in understanding the rate at which the purchasing power of money is eroding. Don't you think so? Though people define inflation is a phenomena of rise in price of goods and services, but I would also put it is a phenomena where the purchasing power of money keeps on falling, right? If the price of goods and services are rising continuously, matlab, the purchasing power of money is also falling for consistently. And that's the reason people are really worried. And when you say people are worried about rising prices, they are not worried about rising price of BMW. They are not worried about rising price of Mercedes. You are worried about rising price of that basket of commodities that we largely consume, where a good part of our income is being spent. Am I right? We mostly worry about changing price of rice, coconut, isn't it? I mean, the essentials, right? I mean, edible oil, pulses, isn't it? Okay, so that's the basket we mostly buy: the clothing, footwear. If you could recollect the basket, I mean, the basket that comprises CPI index. So if you look at in the entire basket, 45% weightage roughly is given to food. So since people do spend a good part of their daily spending on this basket, it has been given more weightage. And you know the fact, okay, that the food prices in India are highly volatile. Because it's not mostly because of change in demand, it's primarily due to change in supply. And I think most of you been aware the fact 23 we have a very bad bounce because of the El Nino. At least last year there is decent rainfall, but 23 we have a very bad rain. And that explains the reason why Modi Saab in the year of 23 has imposed a ban on export of rice. So the problem why this CPI or headline inflation in India is relatively high, though the core inflation remains stable, is because of the increase in prices of especially vegetables and fruits. And that explains the reason, my friends. Okay, if you have gone through these 24 mains paper, there's a question related to the challenges in containing inflation. If you look at the last year economic survey, the economic advisor Anant Nageshwaran has come up with a debate. The debate is, should RBI target core inflation or should RBI target headline inflation? He was just trying to point out what is the problem with RBI targeting headline inflation. Rather, in a way, he is suggesting why not RBI go for targeting core inflation. But one thing is clear, my friends, the inflation, overall inflation, headline inflation, India is relatively high in the last 2-3 years. Which is not only a phenomenon in India, it's the rise in inflation rates is been a global phenomenon. So Hamara effect is primarily due to food prices. But whereas in the other part of the world, it's primarily due to the global supply shocks. And that explains the reason, my friends, if you look at in 2020, during COVID year, every central bank across the world has cut down drastically their interest rates. So if you look at India, it has brought down the repo rate to 4% in COVID. Same is the case. The Federal Reserve of United States of America happened to bring down the Fed funds rate to 0.4%. So there is a synchronization among all central banks when it comes to the interest rate regime in 2020. So every central bank has cut down their interest rates to boost the domestic economies. And at the same time, because of the war between Russia and Ukraine, there is again a synchronization in 2022. Somewhere from 2022, in the first half of 2022, majority of central banks started increasing interest rates to contain inflation. To contain inflation. But how come rising interest rates would contain inflation? Simple. If you are increasing interest rate, does mean you're discouraging demand. In a way, increase in interest rate discourages people to spend less, encourages people to save more because money is becoming costly. Who the hell is going to spend money recklessly? At times, the money is going to fetch you a decent rates of interest. Who could afford to borrow and spend when the interest is too high? So the common practice across the globe, at times of inflation, the central banks resort to tight money policy. So in order to contain the inflation, somewhere from 2022, all central banks, including India, May 2022, Indian Central Bank, that is RBI, started increasing interest rate. But since the inflation has been relatively under control, that's the reason now slowly the central bank across the world have started reducing interest rates. Because the problem is, if you maintain a very high interest rate for a very long span of time, don't you guys think it will hurt the growth of the economy? Because you're deliberately containing demand to contain a phenomenon which is a short term, that is inflation. But in case the inflation is being high for a very long span of time, and in order to tackle it, if you keep the interest rate high for a very long span of time, the market experiences a severe shortage of liquidity. In the month of Jan 2025, it is expected Indian economy has experienced a shortage of liquidity by around 3.5 lakh crore rupees. So liquidity shortage in the month of Jan is literally 3.5 lakh crore rupees. इतना सारा shortage है तो don't you think when there's a severe shortage of anything for that matter, why money, anything, it becomes costly. When it comes to tomato price increases, when it comes to money, interest rates increases. And that explains the reason why the private sector investment in India has hardly experienced any rise post-COVID. Because during COVID, no investor has the ability, isn't it? Though the finance minister keeps on saying you should exhibit animal spirits. But at times the dunya itself experiences severe contraction. How do you really think an investor could dare to raise money from markets to expand his business? And the consequences post-COVID has further because of high interest rate regime, lack of enough global demand has discouraged private investors investing. And that's what I'm pointing out in the last class. Though India is growing at a faster pace, but the primary reason behind this growth is driven by large-scale government spending. Of course, a reasonable spending in the form of infrastructure. But the question is, for how long you sustain the domestic economic growth only by government spending? Then why is the private sector not spending enough? Why is the private sector not investing enough? Because we've been maintaining interest rates very high for a longer span of time. And that's basically, and that explains the reason why in the current budget, economic survey, so he was also explicitly pointing out. So if you look at a headline in food inflation driven by few items, so the answer for the question asked is given by this particular picture. If you look at the headline inflation, the red line, and then you have the purple color headline excluding top. What do you mean by top? Can someone guess top? Anyone, friends? Top here in this, what does it refers to? Tomato, onion, and potato. So just look at these two lines, the red line and the purple line. Headline inflation, look at okay. So look at the variability or simply the volatility of headline inflation. But if you remove the top, I mean tomato, onion, and potato, only these three commodities from the basket, and now compute the inflation, then you could see the purple line, it's relatively stable. And what does it convey? It does mean the reason behind such a great volatility in prices is primarily contributed due to change in prices of tomato, onion, and potato. And I think some of you could recollect in the last 2 years, the government started proactively selling these tomato and onion, potato in the market directly through NCCF and NAFED. Have you seen NCCF and NAFED? Like FCI, they also play a very prominent role in stabilizing food grain prices. NCCF stands for National Consumer Cooperative Federation. NAFED stands for National Agriculture Cooperative Marketing Federation. So if you look at in August, I mean even last year, when the price of tomato has increased, onion has increased, the government happens to ask these agencies to directly sell these produce in the retail markets. I don't know any part of Kerala you might have come across this, but in mostly metropolitan like Mumbai, Kolkata, Delhi, you would be noticing these people. These agencies have opened the retail centers so that where they started selling these produce, tomato and potato at 25 rupees per kilo. Okay, so now let's look at the green line, the light green one. If you look at the headline inflation by removing the vegetables and pulses, then you would notice it's below, it's on an average around 3%, and it's been much stable. So the purpose and what does this picture happens to convey, the graph conveys, is simply it conveys the primary driver of inflation day is due to food basket, and especially with respect to perishable commodities. And to understand better, look at the right hand side of the picture. So here in this case, CFPA stands for, my friends, Consumer Food Price Index. Because as I said, the food grains in India or the price of food grains are highly volatile. That being the reason, along with Consumer Price Index, we also do track an index that tracks the change in price of food basket. And that is what CFPI stands for, Consumer Food Price Index. And look at even that consumer price index, if you remove the tomato, onion, vegetables, then you could notice it has become still. Got it? So this is one thing. And that's the reason. Let's say if someone asks you if inflation is primarily due to the food and that to the perishable commodities, can you come with certain suggestions to address such kind of phenomena where the change in prices is so volatile? And it's you had answered. The primary reason behind the inflation here is especially due to volatility in these basket like tomato, onion, potato, and then comes pulses. And simple, the solution lies in increasing supply, because the reason behind rise in price of this commodity is not just because of sudden rise demand, it's due to mostly falling supply. And how do you tackle it? How do you tackle it? If the inflation is due to supply shock, how do you tackle it? Increase the supply. So how do you generally increase supply? Generally, if you look at the common practice in India, first and foremost, governments imposes ban on exports. If you impose ban on exports, generally, why do people export goods and services? They get a better price. But if you impose a ban, they're compelled to sell their produce in India. That's one way. The second, rather than imposing an outright ban, the common practice is come with a minimum export price. Minimum export price, matlab, rather than saying outrightly exports are banned, you impose a minimum export price. You are free to sell abroad, but the price at which you are going to sell is what I would dictate. Let's suppose if I come with a minimum export price of 300 rupees per tomato, that means you're free to export tomato, but the minimum price at which you need to export tomato is 300. And I guess by that logic, no one in the markets is going to pay 300 rupees for tomato. So they're indirectly compelled to sell it. That's the other way. What else could be done? Liberalize imports, remove restrictions related to import of this. That's other. So first three, impose ban, minimum export price, liberalize imports. What else could be done? Don't end up saying that incentivize people to cultivate more. The reason is, if you incentivize people to cultivate more, maybe you would be experiencing a rise in supply in the next season. But abito, because inflation is a short-term phenomenon. So give me a solution, that helps in tackling the problem in the short run. What else could be done other than liberalizing? So impose stock limits. So if you look at, here are some measures. So because we are running out of time, here are some measures. When it comes to cereals, stock limit on wheat. So the government imposes stock limit. But the traders, generally when there is shortage, what do? They might end up going for hoarding. And by creating artificial shortage, they might end up charging exorbitant. I mean, they might manipulate price. So the government imposes a limit on hoarding, stock limits. Open market sales scheme. What do you mean open market sales scheme? At times when there is a severe shortage and rise in prices, the government of India, through its nodal agencies like FCI, brings the output to the market from their buffer stock and place it for the open market sale. In good old days, the government, the FCI used to sell this produce to the traders, wholesalers, and used to bring it to market to increase the supply and cool down the prices. But now the government has taken a step ahead. Rather than selling it to the wholesalers or the traders, now the government itself started selling in the retail markets. I guess most of you heard about this brand name, Bharat Atta, Bharat Rice, Bharat Dal. So what are they refer to? Basically, the agri produce, the government started selling directly to the retailers. Because the concern of government kya hai? If at times of shortage, if I sell it to a wholesaler, if I sell it to a dealer, he might end up again manipulating cases by simply holding it. But if I want to ensure that this particular goods gets passed on at cheaper price to my people, the best solution kya hai? Let me directly sell it. And that's it. So that's it. Sale under Bharat brand, wheat flour, rice, the government started selling it. When it comes to pulses, look at the initial chicken. Sale under Bharat brand, chana, moong, and masoor dal. Duty-free import. So we liberalized imports. And imposition of stock limits, vegetables. So if you notice, no matter whether it's a pulses, cereals, vegetables, strategy remains the same. Isn't it? Bring your buffer stock to the market, increase supply, impose ban, liberalize exports, isn't it? Impose restrictions, stock limits. That's the same. तो इसके अलावा You cannot increase supply by cultivating overnight. Now let's suppose imagine that Indian government has realized that we are experiencing this problem very frequently, and government happens to heavily subsidize or make a commitment. Arey dekho, even when it comes to okay, these perishable commodities, I'm going to promise you a very high MSP. Just imagine. Then what might happen? A good number of farmers might now shift data from something else to this. So what happens is from the next season we'll have too much of tomato, too much of onion, too much of potato, which is equally bad for the farmer. Why? When there's an abundant supply, and that too it's a perishable crop, isn't it? Prices crash. So it's not that the government has to come up with a great incentive to incentivize cultivation, because too much of tomato is equally bad for a farmer. Too much of onion potato supply would also result in crashing the prices, and that's the reason government has to ensure enough supply as per demand. But हमारे India में the very basic reason why we are experiencing such a severe fluctuation in supply of these products, like here in this case, you have been given an answer for it. The extreme weather conditions we are experiencing. So if you look at the extreme weather conditions, is the reason why there's a great volatility in supply of this produce. Now, friends, tell me, what do you think is the best solution? Simple. The economic survey itself also has suggested a solution. India has to. In fact, even in budget, we have seen the government now has to come up with the high investing money and producing high yielding seeds. Not only high yielding seeds, also has to come up with the climate resilient seeds that could withstand these kind of harsh weather conditions. That's the only solution we left with. Am I clear? Yes. Okay, so it is because of this, okay, you would notice the fact when it comes to the monetary policy, the central bank also for a longer span of time has maintained a very high rate of interest, and that is what you could notice. And the second important thing is, okay, the other important information is the gross NPS have sharply declined somewhere from 7.3%. In fact, it used to be much worse in 2014-15. Roughly around 12% used to the NPS, and now it has come down to 2.6%, and that's something that we Indians has to feel happy for it, because if the banks do experience rise in NPS, then the government do ends up simply keeping on floating banks using taxpayers' money through recapitalization. At least the low NPS of banks will make banks strong and resilient enough, so that they don't need to keep on running to government. Please do rescue. We're just ending up making more losses. Got it? So that's one thing. And then next, okay, so here in this case, okay, you don't need to worry much about capital markets. Okay, so let me just give a brief. I think even most of you, okay, I guess some of you already might be investing money in stock markets, and especially in the last 5 years, you might have seen the okay the number of people who happen to open demat accounts and the participation of capital markets has phenomenally increased in India, because these stockbrokers have made things very easy. The way you place order for groceries in Amazon or Zepto is the simplest way you could order simply some stocks in the stock market. Trade has become very easy. No matter whether people have a good knowledge on which stock to buy, which stock to sell, isn't it? When to enter, when to exit. But since it has become easy, and now people start having this perception because of these so-called okay influencers and all these things, a good number of people start participating. So there's been a phenomenal increase in the number of people who happen to participate in stock markets, but it also has come with a challenge. That is, the Indian economy right now is experiencing over financialization. Has been the amount of money flowing into the real sector is much less compared to the amount of money moving into finance sector. Has been for every 100 rupees of investment in real estates, there's been 150 rupees, more than 100 rupees being invested in the stocks that correspond to that real estate. Isn't it? So that's mean the actual real estate generation has remained more or less constant. But the partnership, the demand for partnership of that particular one, okay, isn't it, is been increasing. So obviously, what's the problem of over financialization? Market experiences bubbles, and any bubble at some point of time would crash, which results in loss of a good amount of money to majority of people. So that's the concern. The finance, okay, the economic advisor. In fact, the former civic chairman also expressed India right now is experiencing over financialization. The capital or the investment moving into real sector is being reduced, but the capital moving into the financial sector is increasing, and it doesn't make sense. Got it? So that's the other important thing. Okay. And okay, so rest of the things I would share this particular highlights because it's also something you could evaluate from the indiabudget.gov.in. So since we're okay, I have a different class scheduled. So what I would suggest, I would pass it on. And if you have any doubts, because the most important part is what I think I covered. But the rest of the things are self-explanatory. But if you still have any problem, do let me know, and I would happy to help you. Or else I will just simply pass on some recorded session. Okay. Okay. Yes. So I was just expecting that you people would be asking some questions and it would be more or less an interaction. But don't worry, my friends. Okay, so if you have spent some decent time on Indian economy, okay, you attended all the classes, but whosoever happened to talk to you, none of these things seems to be difficult to understand. So this particular, whatever the sheet I'm referring to, the PDF document, which is the highlights of the entire economic survey, is good enough. Ek bar, just go through it. In case you have any doubt, do let the management know, then I'll try to come with a solution for it. Is that okay? All right. So that's for the day. Thank you. Okay. Hopefully meet sometime.